There is a particular kind of love that does not announce itself.
Yes, and the coffee
It
is
lives in the
brewing
early
perfectly.
morning, in the sound of a coffee maker, and the smell of
Smells
toast,
amazing,
and two
James.
people moving around the same kitchen
These
without
mountain
getting
herbs
in
will
each
go
other's
perfectly.
way.
Look at
Because
the
after
farmer, he
enough
works
years
so
together,
hard.
Keep
You
warm
just
to Diep.
know.
Thank you, James.
Diep
Thank you,
leaves the
James.
house at 7:45. James sees her off at the door. They have done this for 8 years. It is the most ordinary thing in the world. It is everything. Diep's alarm goes off at 6:15. Not because she needs
Mist
that
is
long to get
beautiful
ready.
today.
She is efficient in the
Feels
mornings.
fresh.
Always has
Time to
been.
get started.
Shower, dressed, hair done in 20 minutes if she
I think
needs
these
to
plants
be.
are ready.
But she likes
Let's
the
go.
extra time. Likes the house when it is still quiet
The air is so
and the
fresh
light is
here.
still coming in at a low
It
angle.
truly is.
And
So
nobody
peaceful.
needs
Here
anything
is
from
your
her
coffee,
yet.
James.
She makes coffee first.
Thank you to Diep.
Always
Smells
coffee
wonderful.
first. The kitchen in the early
Coffee's
morning
getting
is
thicker.
hers in a way it is not at any other time of day.
It's
Nee is still
peaceful.
asleep. James is still
waking up.
asleep. The birds are just starting at the feeder outside the window. The garden is still in shadow. The sunflowers along the back fence dark shapes against the lightening sky. She stands at the counter with her first cup and looks out at it, and does not think about anything in particular. Just drinks her coffee. Just stands there. This is the part of the day
The
she has
mountain
never
air is
told
fresh
anyone
this
about,
morning.
because
Yes.
there is nothing to tell really.
And the village is already
Nothing
hard
happens.
at work.
She just
The morning
stands in
view
her
is
kitchen
so
in the early
beautiful
morning
today.
quiet and exists
Yes,
for a few
it
minutes
feels
before the day begins. It is the most
Together,
important part
we
of her
brought
day.
this sapling life.
She has worked at the same accounting firm
Look at
for
the
6
view.
years.
It's
The
beautiful.
commute is 40 minutes by bus, which she does not
The yield
mind.
looks promising, James.
She has a window seat
Yes.
she
The
considers
mist and
hers
light have been
by
good for the
habit, if not
harvest.
by right. And she spends the 40 minutes either reading or
Don't
looking
worry,
out the
we'll get through
window
this.
or doing the
No,
quiet mental
thank you.
preparation that the workday requires. The firm handles
The harvest
mid-sized
count
businesses
seems promising
mostly.
this year.
Payroll,
I'm glad
tax
to
compliance,
hear that, Diep.
quarterly reports.
I have exactly 200
The work is
perfect
precise
leaves.
and detail-oriented
Excellent
and
work.
requires a particular
This soil
kind
feels
of
ready.
sustained
Let's get
attention
started.
that
The quality
Diep
is
is
excellent
genuinely
today.
good at.
Just like last year.
She is not the
These
kind
look
of person who
perfect.
makes careless errors.
Let's bring these to
She
the
checks
storage
her
shed.
work.
Excellent
She
quality,
checks
my
it again.
child. She
Her
works
clients
so
trust her
hard.
because she has never given them a reason
We
not
are
to.
grateful.
Her
The
manager,
yield looks
a
promising,
careful
Margaret.
woman named
I agree
Mrs.
to
Huang, who has been at the
James,
firm for
can we
20
adjust the water
years,
flow there?
once
On
told
it,
her,
Margaret.
"You think
Your
like an
tea is
engineer,
exquisite. A true
but you
blessing.
talk like a person."
Thank you.
Diep had taken this
so-
as the
This is
compliment
it.
it was intended to be.
I'm so
She is good at her
tired.
job. She is
Take a
also,
break, you've
on
worked
most
hard.
days,
Let me help you with
very
this.
tired by 4 o'clock.
It's demanding
The
work,
past year
but look
changed
at
the
what we've
shape of her
created.
tiredness.
It's
Before the
worth every bit of
diagnosis,
effort.
tired meant the ordinary accumulation of a full workday, the sustained
Yeah.
concentration,
Thank you.
the client calls,
You're welcome.
the reports that needed one more pass before they
You're
were
welcome.
right, the kind of
Smells ready.
tired that a good dinner and a
Almost
reasonable
done
bedtime
chopping.
fixes. After the diagnosis, there was another layer underneath that one,
I'm glad you feel
a tiredness that did not come from work at all,
I thought you might like to
that
see
was
this.
there when she woke up in the morning
beautiful. Thank
and
you.
still there when she went to bed at night.
Look at this
The tiredness of someone who is always at some level paying attention
Yes.
to something beyond the
you're doing
task
great.
in front of them. She learned
Thanks,
to carry
James.
it without
I'm
showing
just
it.
a little tired.
At the office
almost done
was
here.
Diep, who handled
All
the
right,
Nguyen
James.
account and the
We
FAM
need
account,
these 10 baskets
and
of kale
remembered
ready
which
first.
clients needed
Got
the
it.
reports,
I'll
formatted
finish this week
differently,
quickly.
and always had the
19,
quarterly
20,
projections
21
done
baskets.
2 days
The
before they
yield
were
is good
due.
this season.
Excellent
Whatever
work.
was
This
happening
high
at
altitude
home
corn is the best.
stayed at
Time
home.
to head in.
This was not suppression.
Let's go.
It was compartmentalization. And there is a difference.
Do you see
She
that
was good
hidden
at
root
that, too.
discrepancy?
Yes, the dog.
On a
hidden
Tuesday in
root
late
is
July,
the source of the
Diep
trouble.
has a long day.
We'll have to adjust
The
the
Min
irrigation
construction
here.
account
roots are
has a
damaged.
discrepancy in the second quarter payroll
How far does it go?
that she has been working
Too deep.
through since 9 in the
We need to
morning.
find the cause.
And by 2 o'clock, she has
Together.
found the source of it.
Almost got it.
A data entry error compounded over 6
We did
weeks,
it.
small enough that
See?
nobody
I
caught
knew
it,
you could.
large enough that
I
it
think
matters.
This one will thrive here.
And she spends the next hour writing up the
Yes.
correction
Yes,
and the
it looks
explanation
strong.
clearly
Keep up
enough
the good work.
that the client will understand
The soil
exactly
here
what
needs
happened
balancing.
and exactly
Adding
what she
organic
did
matter
about
will
it.
greatly improve the yield.
She
Village
emails
Elder.
it at 3:17.
Here is
Mrs.
the new
Wong
ledger,
stops by her
Margaret.
desk
I
at
hope it
3:30.
helps.
Min,
Thank
construction,
you to Diep. This is
she
very
says.
important to us.
Fixed.
You've done a
Diep
beautiful job
says.
to Diep.
Reports
Thank
in
you,
your
Margaret.
inbox.
Perfect.
Mrs.
And
Wong
then,
nods once.
Looks like a great harvest
Good
this year.
catch. She
If
moves
this row
on.
is thriving, we
That
can
is
start
the
here.
whole conversation. Diep
Alright.
goes back to the
Alright,
next
got
item
the
on her
tools ready?
list. This is
Look at
what
these
most of
leaves
her
to
work
Diep.
days look like.
Perfect.
Not dramatic,
Yes, James.
not
the
particularly
quiet
memorable
afternoon.
in any
Perfect for
individual moment.
harvesting.
The soil
Just
here needs
the
to be
steady,
secure.
reliable,
You're doing a great
unglamorous
job. It
work
looks much
of
healthier.
someone who is good at what she does and shows up every day.
I think if we
and
nurture this
does.
land like our ancestors
She
did,
calls James at
it will
lunch.
truly thrive.
This is also a habit.
You're right.
Has been since
can
the
see it already.
diagnosis, though
The
she has
mountain
adjusted
holds
the
so
nature
much,
of the calls,
James. It feels
without
like
either of
home.
them ever discussing the adjustment.
I know exactly what you
In the
need to
early
do.
months, the calls were about
Try
logistics.
some of these.
Did you eat?
Thank you.
Did you take your
It looks
medication?
delicious.
How
They're
was the
fresh from
morning
the
going?
mountain.
Practical
Your harvest is
questions
incredible
with
this
practical
year, James.
answers.
How did you manage these
Now the
huge
calls are
tomatoes?
different.
It's been a good season.
She calls
to
and
Diep.
he picks up,
Lots of care.
and she asks
at
what he is
this.
doing, and he tells
It's
her.
the best harvest we've ever
Today he
had.
tells her he has been in the garden
James,
most of the
absolutely
morning,
Incredible.
that
Well
the
done.
tomatoes are
The
coming in
harvest is
faster than he
huge,
expected,
James. More than
and he
we
has been trying to
expected.
figure out what to do with the excess.
What will we do with it all?
That Nee
I
texted
have an
him from
idea.
school to ask if they could make pasta sauce this weekend. She texted you from school? Diep says. During lunch, I assume. She said it was
Yes,
urgent.
That's hilarious.
Pasta sauce is urgent.
Thank you for
Apparently,
letting me know.
Diep is sitting in the small break room with her lunch in
We did it,
front
we
of
did.
her, looking at the
We
wall,
did it. Who did it?
and she is
Yes,
smiling
Yes, we did.
in a way she
I
does
can't
not
believe it.
entirely
yes, the
register
harvest is
herself.
plentiful this year. It's beautiful.
I'll pick up
here
the jars
today.
on my way
I'll
home,
send you photos
she
soon.
says, for the canning. You know
I saw
how
that.
to can things?
You looked a little guilty.
I know how to look it up. James is quiet
Good
for a moment
soil,
on the
good
other end.
soil.
She can hear the garden in the
I
background,
believe in this project.
the birds,
So do I.
the faint sound of wind.
This harvest is promising.
Good day? He asks.
Yes.
Long day. Good enough.
Oh, that's
You?
wonderful.
Good
Thank
day,
you so much.
he says.
We'll be there soon.
Actually, good.
Hello?
She believes him. She has learned to read the quality of his
Oh,
good
thank
days
God.
in the
Thank
first
you.
3 seconds of a phone call.
Bye.
This one
Take care.
is real.
Come on in.
I'll see you at 6, she says. I'll have dinner started. She hangs up and finishes her lunch and goes back to her desk. The bus home takes 45 minutes because of traffic near the Central Market. And Diep spends the extra time not reading, just looking out the window at the city going through its late afternoon rhythms. The vendors packing up, the school children in their
My
uniforms,
grandmother told me stories.
the long amber light coming off the buildings on the
Beautiful
west
here.
side of the street.
Don't worry.
She
we'll
thinks
get
about
through
the
this.
Min construction payroll,
Don't worry.
about
get
whether
through
she
this.
should flag the internal
so
review
beautiful
process to
here.
Mrs. Wong or let it go since the correction is already handled. She thinks about pasta sauce and whether she actually knows how
I
to
used to
properly
play there when I
sterilize
was a
canning
child.
jars, or whether she is going to have to learn that from the internet tonight.
Beautiful.
She thinks about James saying actually good on the phone and the way he says
It's
things
beautiful here.
when he wants her to know he
Exactly like
means
I
them
imagined.
precisely. The bus stops 2 blocks from the house, and she walks the rest of the way in the early evening air, her bag on one shoulder,
Ciao ba.
passing the same shops
Ciao.
and the same
Ciao.
corner and the same gate that she has passed every working day for 3
I'm home,
years since
James.
they moved to this neighborhood. She knows this walk the way she knows her own
back.
handwriting. She
Welcome
hears
back.
the kitchen before she
I
opens
heard
the
you were
door.
here.
The sound of something on the stove, and underneath
Come
it,
It's almost ready.
James's voice. low and
I brought the
conversational,
tomatoes you asked for.
talking to someone.
Excellent. They look perfect.
She opens the
picked them
door
this morning.
and finds him at the
You're a
stove
lifesaver.
with a wooden
Stew will be
spoon
amazing.
and knee sitting on the counter, which she is not supposed to do, and which both of them conveniently forget when Diep is not home. Talking to him with great animation about something that happened at school today, involving a misunderstanding
Really?
about a
What is
science
it?
project
He's going on an adventure.
and a considerable injustice that needed to be documented. James is listening and stirring
Dear, what
and
happened
making the
next?
appropriate responses in the appropriate places. He hears Diep come in and turns around. There's the woman who knows how to can
Yes,
things,
help me
he
rinse it off.
says.
You make
I said I know how to
everything taste
look.
even Better.
Spit it up,
Stop.
Diep
Look what
says,
you did.
setting her bag down. That is not the same thing. Close enough, Nee says from the blank counter. Diep looks at her
I
on
knew
the
you couldn't
counter.
resist.
Nee looks back with the expression of someone who knows the rule and has made a calculated decision. Diep hangs up her jacket,
You can't keep it
does not say
forever,
anything
Sweetie.
about the counter. She goes to the stove and looks at what James is making.
But it's mine.
A simple tomato
Smells
sauce
wonderful.
from the garden tomatoes.
Yes,
Smell
the
of it
monster
filling the whole
tomatoes are
kitchen
perfect
in the way
this year.
only fresh
Try it.
tomatoes do.
Delicious.
And something in her shoulders drops about half an inch from where it has been all day. She gets out a spoon
Yeah,
and tastes
it's
it.
almost ready.
Needs more
Does
basil,
it need
she
anything
says.
else?
I was about to say the
That's
same
perfect.
thing,
Exactly
James
right.
says. She goes to the back step and picks several
smells so
leaves
good.
from her pot, brings them back in, tears them over the pot. James stirs them through.
Smells good, doesn't it?
They taste it again, both of them, from the same spoon.
So yummy.
Better, Diep says.
Perfect.
Better,
Oh, yes,
James
I
agrees.
know.
Nee, still on the
What
counter,
do you think?
watches. This with the patient expression of someone waiting for the
Still
meal to
waiting,
be
huh?
ready. Can I get down now? She asks. You can get down now,
You know
Diep
you're
says.
excited.
Time to
Dinner
get
is
down,
easy
sweetheart.
and unhurried,
Dinner's ready.
the way Tuesday dinners can be when nobody has anywhere to be afterward.
Grab a seat. Pasta's here.
They eat the pasta with
is
the fresh
absolutely
sauce,
Perfect.
and Nee gives a detailed account of the science project
Mommy,
situation
it's the best
that turns
pasta
out to be less about injustice and more about a miscommunication between two friends that has since been resolved, but still needed to be processed aloud.
Do you have a favorite adventure? from
James
school
asks
today?
questions at the right intervals.
Diep
Eats and listens
how wonderful.
and adds a comment here and there and watches her daughter work through the story and arrive at the conclusion
Yes, it is.
she had already
Best.
reached before she started
Great.
telling it, which is the actual purpose of the telling.
Oh,
After dinner,
that was
Nee does
beautiful.
homework at the kitchen table,
Perfect.
and Diep sits with her second cup of tea going through the Min construction file one more
What is
time on
2
her
plus 3?
laptop. Not because she
Girl,
needs
keep
to,
going.
but because she is the kind of person who checks her work one more time
How's your drawing
when something
coming
was
along, sweetheart?
complicated. The correction holds. Everything is right. She
Almost
closes
done.
the laptop.
This code is tricky.
James is in the living room with a book.
That's okay. Just do your best.
She can see him from where she sits.
Finally finished.
The familiar shape of him in his chair, the reading lamp on, the remember book on the side table where it always is now. She refills her tea,
I'll get this ready.
sits
James.
back down at the kitchen
Thank you,
table,
Diep.
listens to the quiet sounds of her house at 8 o'clock on a Tuesday night in late July. Knees pencil on paper, the occasional page turn from the living room. The basil on the back step, in the dark, doing whatever basil does in the evening when nobody is watching
Needed
it.
this. Me
The
too.
most ordinary evening imaginable. James's day starts later. Not because he sleeps late. He has never been a late sleeper, even in the hard months when staying in bed was the path of least resistance. He is usually awake by 7, lying in the quiet for a while, listening to Diep moving around
Coffee
downstairs.
is ready.
The coffee maker. The particular sound her shoes make on the kitchen
That's what I like
tiles.
to hear.
The back door opening briefly, which means she has gone to check on the basil.
The view is beautiful today.
He does not get up immediately.
It always is.
He lies
Air
there
feels so
and takes
fresh.
stock of the morning the way the doctors suggested.
I'm pruning the basil.
Not
It
anxiously.
smells wonderful.
He has learned the difference between taking stock and catastrophizing. And it took him longer than he would like to admit to learn it.
Yes, it truly is.
He just pays attention,
Thank you, James.
notes where he is, what he remembers,
Guys,
what the day
Always
looks
to
like
the
from the
Always
inside.
to the
Most
deep.
mornings it looks fine. This morning it looks fine. He gets up. He makes it downstairs in time to see Diep off at
Are
the
you
door
sure?
most mornings.
I have packed everything.
This matters to
I'll
him
handle things
in a way
now.
he has not tried to put into words,
thank you for helping
because
me,
some
James.
things resist
course,
being put
Diep.
into words,
Look what
and
they
this is one of
posted.
them. He just knows
way.
that on the mornings he misses it,
I know.
when he has slept
I
badly,
love that.
and the morning is
I
slower.
feel drawn to this place.
The day has a slightly different quality. Not worse
Wait for
exactly, just different, like a photograph that is technically correct, but taken from the wrong angle.
You look ready for the climb.
This Tuesday morning,
Thank you,
he is
James.
at the door at
Mountains are incredible
7:43.
today.
Almost
Tu
done.
Diep is pulling her jacket on, bag already on her shoulder, checking something on her phone with the focused efficiency she brings to
The
all
data
morning
clearly shows a
tasks.
discrepancy in the recent harvest.
in construction
we need to
today,
act quickly to understand
she
why this
says.
is happening.
I
Not
agree.
looking
We'll
up.
investigate this immediately.
The payroll
Thank you,
thing?
Diep.
The payroll thing. She puts her phone away.
Got it.
Should be straightforward.
No, you
Call me at
do.
lunch.
I know you do.
She looks at him,
You knew all
a brief
along,
look,
didn't you?
the kind that
I
carries
understand.
more than it shows. I always call you at lunch. I know,
going.
he says.
Thanks.
I'm just
Thanks.
saying. She touches his arm once on her way past. He stands in the doorway and watches her go down the front path and through the gate and turn left toward the bus stop. And he stays there until she rounds the corner and is gone. And then he closes the door and goes back to the kitchen. James's. Mornings have a structure now that he built himself, slowly and deliberately, over the past several months. This took longer than the structure itself suggests. In the early months after the diagnosis, there was no structure, which is part of what made those months as hard as they were. The days had no shape. He would wake up and the hours would spread out in front of him, formless and unmarked, and he would spend them getting through rather than living them.
Ooh, look what I've
He does not
got.
get through days
Hello
anymore.
there. Did you
He
pick that
lives
yourself?
The structure is not complicated. It does not need to be. He has coffee in the kitchen while the morning is still quiet. He reads for an hour. Real reading. The kind that requires attention. Not the kind where your eyes move across the page while your mind is somewhere else entirely. He has become ruthless about this distinction. If he is not actually reading, he puts the book down and does something else. Then the garden, if the weather allows. If it does not,
bring
then
it through,
other
dear.
things. Small maintenance, tasks around the house that he has started noticing and attending to in a way he did not before. A loose hinge on the cabinet under the bathroom sink that he fixed last Thursday. A section of grout in the kitchen backsplash that needed resealing. The kind of work that has a clear beginning and a clear end and leaves something visibly better than it was. He has discovered
Look
he
at them.
needs that. The
All
visible
that hard
improvement.
work
The
finally
thing
paid off.
done. This Tuesday morning, the garden gets 2 hours. The tomatoes are coming in faster than he expected. The warm July has been generous. And he spends the first hour harvesting, moving carefully along the rows, checking each plant, picking what is ready,
The harvest is
and
abundant
leaving what
this
needs
year.
another day or two. By 9:30, he has a substantial pile on the back step. He goes inside and gets the kitchen scale and weighs them out of straightforward curiosity. 4.3 kilograms. He notes this in the small garden notebook he has been keeping since May. Not a formal journal, just a record. Dates planted, first growth observed, first harvest, yield. The kind of information that would be useful next year. He is planning for next year. He does this now without thinking about it. And there was a time not long ago when next year was not something he planned for. And he is aware of the distance between those two versions of himself, and he does not take it for granted. He takes a photograph of the tomatoes on the back step and sends it to Nies.
Perfect.
Phone for
Look
when
at
she
those
gets to school.
colors.
She responds 11 minutes later with 3 exclamation points and the question, "Can we make sauce this weekend?"
That, my little
He
one.
texts back, "Ask your mother."
Look what I found.
She texts back, "I'm texting her now."
I told him that.
He puts
And
his
he
phone
actually
in
fell
his
for it.
pocket and goes back to the garden. The second hour in the garden is less productive in the literal sense
I saw
and
that.
more
Very
productive
funny.
in the other sense. He
They're
does the
having so
slow
much
work,
fun.
checking the ties on the
Getting into
tomato
everything
stakes,
as usual.
looking for signs of anything that should not be there, deadheading the basil so it does not go to seed too quickly. The kind of
I
tasks
think that one is
that do
secure.
not strictly require thought and therefore leave room for thought.
Good.
He thinks
Let's move
about the
on to
morning,
next row.
about
This one is
Diep
perfect.
going through the gate at 7:45 with her
Thank you,
bag on her
James.
shoulder,
These are so fragrant.
about the Min construction payroll issue she mentioned, and how she said should be straightforward in the tone that means she has already thought it through and knows how to handle it.
Hello, James.
He thinks about
Hello,
what it
James.
means to watch someone you
Good
love
morning,
be good
Diep.
at something,
Welcome.
really
so lovely
good
to
at,
see you.
in the quiet and
I
consistent
truly
way
believe
that does
this
not announce
cooperative
itself.
will change everything.
Tu
We can
Diep
do
has been
so
good
much
at her
together.
job for as long
I
as he
agree
has
completely.
known
It
her.
makes perfect sense.
He used to take this for
Did
granted,
a great job.
the way you take things for granted when they are simply part of the landscape
Thank
of your
you. I
life.
couldn't have done it without you.
He does not take it for granted anymore.
This season's crop
He does
looks
not take
promising.
much for granted anymore.
Yes, the morning mist has been good
This
to them.
is one of the
Keep
things
up
the
the
hard
good
year
work,
gave
children.
him.
Look at the colors.
He is not grateful for the hard
so
year.
Beautiful.
He is not constructed
Yes,
that
it
way.
truly is.
And the idea
Look
of
at them
being
all
grateful
working
for
together.
suffering has always seemed to him like a category error. But he is clear-eyed about what the hard year changed in him. And this is one of the things that changed. He notices more. He is here more.
Thank you.
The garden
Means
in the
a lot.
morning. The weight
The
of the
time is
tomatoes
now.
in his hand.
We are ready.
The sound of the
Yeah.
birds at the feeder.
Yes.
Tu Diep's shoes on the
You
kitchen
are ready
tiles
for this.
at 6:30
The soil.
while he is still
It's
lying
truly
upstairs
alive.
taking stock of the day.
Yes.
He is here
We
for
put our
all
hearts
of
into
it
it.
now. Tu
Nice
Diep
and
calls
heavy.
at 12:17. He is in the kitchen making lunch, something simple,
Good way.
rice and vegetables
Yeah,
from
very
yesterday.
nice.
Nothing that requires
home,
sustained
James.
attention.
These are
And her
perfect,
name
Diep.
comes up on the
The
phone,
garden is beautiful.
and he
this
picks up
morning.
on the second ring.
I made your favorites.
Fixed it, she
Aw.
says before he can say anything.
I think
The payroll
I sorted
thing.
it out.
That's a
Data
relief.
entry error
Yes,
compounded
everything will
over
be
6
okay.
weeks. Found it this morning.
Looks like Diep is busy.
He can hear in her
She's
voice
working in the
the
garden
particular
today.
satisfaction of a problem correctly
Look at the
solved.
terrace fields too.
Not pride exactly,
I love.
just the clean
got
feeling
it.
of work
It's
done
exactly what we needed.
right. Mrs. Huang said,
Excellent.
"Good
I
catch."
knew you could do it.
It was a good
Yes,
catch.
we did it.
It was thorough work,
James.
she says, with the precision of someone who
Just
knows
look
the
at this
difference.
view.
What are
Look at
you
We
doing?
did it.
Making lunch.
It's perfect.
The garden gave me 4 kilograms of tomatoes this morning. I saw Nee's messages.
Look at these.
She's
I'm
very
gonna make
excited
something
about the
special.
sauce.
They're wonderful. What do
I
you
told her
think
I'd
of
look up the
making?
canning. Can you actually can things?
Look
I
at
can learn to
these.
can things,
They're
she says.
beautiful. The best crop
That's
this
essentially the
season.
same.
Look at this.
He stirs the rice and looks
No
out the
way.
kitchen window at the garden.
That's hilarious.
The sunflowers
I
are
told you.
fully
Wait,
lit
look at
now
his
in the
other
midday
one.
sun. 3 of them along the fence, turning their faces toward the light the way they do. Good morning, she asks. Good
Aren't they
morning, he
magnificent?
says. Garden was
Here
good.
we are.
Reading was good. He pauses.
Look how tall that one
It's
is.
just a good day. The small silence on her end that means she is registering
Thank you
this,
for sharing it.
filing it in the same careful way she files everything important. I'll be home at 6, she says. I'll have dinner started. He puts the phone down and finishes making
Font
his
is
lunch
thriving.
and eats it at the kitchen table with the back door open looking out at the
Good,
garden.
dinner's almost ready.
The afternoon is quieter.
I saw them
He reads
walking
for
the
another
fields this
hour
morning.
after lunch.
Yes.
They are
Then he
taking
does the thing
crops
he
to
has
the market.
started doing on Tuesday and
Be
Thursday
careful with those
afternoons.
tools.
He goes to the small desk in the corner of the living room, and he writes, not a journal. He tried a journal in the early months, and it became too much like a record of symptoms, which was not what he wanted. This is different. He writes things he wants to remember, stories from before,
Mark, it's just not
the way his
working.
father's garden smelled in
It's okay,
August,
take a breath.
the first apartment
You'll
he
get
and Diep had together, the one with the window that stuck, and the landlord who never fixed it, and the view of the street that was actually quite good once you accepted the
Isn't
noise.
this view just
The morning Nee was
breathtaking?
born, and how he
It
stood in the
truly
hospital
is.
corridor
It
after
gives you perspective.
and felt like
I think it's
something
stuck.
fundamental had rearranged itself inside him and would not be going back. He writes these things down not because he is afraid of losing them, though that fear is there, quietly, the way it is always there, but because they deserve to be written,
I
because they
finally
happened,
understand.
and they were good,
Yes.
and they belong somewhere more permanent
Isn't
than
it
memory.
breathtaking?
Absolutely, I haven't
He
seen
fills
anything like
2
it.
pages on
And the
this Tuesday
farmers,
afternoon.
They work so hard.
They
Then he
do.
closes the
They're part of
notebook
the beauty of
and
this
makes
place.
tea and takes it to the garden
I love it, James.
and sits on the back step in the late afternoon
What do you
sun
think of this idea?
until he hears the
Yes,
gate
that's
open at
exactly
the end
right.
of the front path.
The garden is truly
To
beautiful
Diep's
today.
footsteps
Yes,
up the
the
front
tea is
path
perfectly
are a
brewed
sound he
today.
knows,
Look at the terrace.
the way he
in the
knows
background.
very few
Farmers
sounds,
are finishing their work.
the particular rhythm of them, the pace
Welcome to
that
Diep.
tells him how the
Please
day
have a seat.
went before she has said a single word.
James, it's lovely
Today
to see
the
you
pace is
again.
measured and even, not
The
the quick
crops are
step of a
flourishing
day
this
that went
season.
badly and needs to be
But
left
we
behind.
must prepare for the harvest.
Not the slower
Right.
step of exhaustion that goes bone deep,
The path
just
is
her
beautiful.
normal pace.
Yes,
The pace of
but
someone
I
who has
prefer
done
the
a
view
full
ahead.
day's work and is now done with it and ready to be home.
Welcome to
He hears the key in the
Welcome
lock,
to
the door,
Hello,
her
James.
bag on the hook.
It's wonderful to see you.
He is already at the stove when she comes into the kitchen, and he turns
Hello
around,
there.
and she is standing in the doorway
Welcome home.
in her work clothes, with her jacket half off, and she looks exactly the way she always looks when she first comes home,
Welcome home.
simultaneously
Hi, I'm
present
glad to be back.
and still slightly in transit.
Welcome back.
One foot in the day she just
Did you have a
left,
good trip?
and one foot
Yes,
in the
I did.
evening ahead.
Everything looks wonderful.
There's the woman who knows how to can things, he
I'm
says.
exhausted.
I'm exhausted.
I said I know how to
It's
look
good.
it up, she says.
You did well.
That
Just
is not
rest
the
now.
same thing. From the
Can't argue
counter
with my recipe.
where Nee is sitting, which she is
What
not
do you mean?
supposed to be doing,
Just try it.
comes.
Okay. And that's
Close
why you
enough.
can't leave the gate open with the goat.
To Diep looks
Just
at
once.
Nee on the
Just
counter.
once is too many, James.
Nee
You know
looks
how
back.
curious they are.
I know.
To Diep hangs up her jacket and says nothing about the counter and comes to on the stove
way.
and
That's
looks at what he is
actually
making and picks up a spoon and tastes it.
She got it.
Needs more
You are
basil,
so brave,
she says.
Nee.
I was about to say the same thing. She goes to the back
Good,
step
lady.
and picks several leaves from her pot.
Perfect.
Thank
The
you.
one
I'm
she
glad
moved.
you like it.
Twice to find the right sun.
It's absolutely
The one she
delicious,
checks
James.
every morning
Smells
before
so
anyone else
fresh.
is awake
It does.
and brings
It
them back,
does.
tears them into the
Look at
sauce,
that view.
and James stirs them through, and they taste it again from the same
Smells so
spoon.
fresh.
Better, she says.
It's gonna
Better,
be perfect
he
in the
agrees.
stew.
This is the point in the day where the two shifts meet,
This is perfect.
her day and his day.
You enjoy
The parallel
Yes, it
rhythms
tastes
of two people
incredible.
living the same life from different angles, arriving at the same kitchen, at the same stove, at the end of it, tasting the same sauce from the same spoon. The most
Smells
ordinary thing in the
delicious.
world. The whole day in one moment.
Can I help?
Just a minute, sweet pea.
The children are happy.
As long as we are together.